He ain't getting up. Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of our survival series. In the previous 2 videos, we took the third-person template project, added a few variables for health and a few other stats, have timers slowly bringing down those stats, and we have a few ways to replenish them in the level. First things first, I think the interaction radius for these pickups that we made in the last level are a little too big, so let's go ahead and change that. Let's go to blueprints, pickups, and the only one we have to change it in is our master pickup. If we go to the viewport, we can just grab that sphere, bring it down a little bit. You can even minimize the window just so you can see it in the level. I'm just going to keep it real small, something like 70. There we go. That way you don't just accidentally pick it up by running around like I was last time. As soon as I started, I would just pick up all 3 of these. Oh, I accidentally picked up the bed, but the bed's kind of huge, so yeah, that's probably fine. So in today's video, what we want to do is have our third-person character bring his stats all the way down. And in our master character, because I think it'd be fun if this happened to everyone, including NPCs, but as soon as their stats reach a low amount or even empty, I want some detrimental, harmful effects to happen to our characters. And I think it'd be fun to do something like health. Of course, when it gets to 0%, we'll have our character die. I've done videos in the past of having characters die. We're going to do it very similar to that, but just sort of an upgraded version. I want to show you a few things that I would do to improve that last system from our character damage video. For stamina, we can go ahead and lower our walk speed for our character. I think by default, our walk speed is 600. We're going to go ahead and bring that down to something around 200. For hydration, we're going to go ahead and change our health value just a little bit. Like the skit showed, if you don't drink water, then you can end up dying pretty quick. You do need a lot more water than you need food. So for hydration, we're going to bring our health down just a little bit at a time. And for sleep, I plan on just having our walk speed, instead of being slow, I'm going to have it set to no walk speed, 0 walk speed, just for a little bit, like our character has narcolepsy almost, if you've ever seen the movie Rat Race. Something like that. And then with our character dying, with the health bar, I also plan on doing sort of a game over screen, and we can go ahead and restart our game from there on the game over screen. So let's get right to it. Let's do those harmful effects, and like I said, we are going to do these in the master character, not just the master playable character. I think, and this is totally up to you, you can do all of this just in your player character, your master player character, if you don't want any of this to affect your NPCs. But I think it'd be fun to have NPCs walking around real slow, or NPCs just going to sleep for a little bit. Should be pretty interesting. But since we can get a game over with characters dying, we'll have to add one variable there to say if this character dies, will it give us a game over? And that's going to be a boolean, so let's start off with that. And we're going to add that new variable here, and this is going to be called death causes game over. Kind of a long name for a variable, but it makes sense. Goes ahead and just tells you what it is. We're going to make that instance editable so that we know in the level on the right hand side in the details panel we should see by default, does this character's death cause a game over? And for our player character, yes it will. I want it to default have a false value so that we don't have to manually turn off this variable for every single instance of our characters in the game. But if we do have, later on, let's say an important NPC character, something like that, if they die, we can check this for them as well. That way we can get a game over if we need to protect someone or something like that. So let's go ahead and create these detrimental effects that I mentioned earlier. So we have already created the change health function, and that's the one that we're going to need to go ahead and kill our character. The first thing that we're going to need to do to change this is basically just have something happen when our character dies. In our change health function, we already have this branch here, the true branch, that shows if our character has 0 health. And if that's the case, we're going to call another function to go ahead and kill our character. First, let's make that function. So we'll click the plus, and this is going to be called character death. Pretty self-explanatory. It's just everything that we're going to want to happen when our character dies. And let's just add that straight away. We do still want our health to be set to 0, otherwise the progress bar can be a little skewed, or if we have an extra amount on it, we can see a negative on the progress bar, so we really wanted to just keep it at empty. Let's go ahead and plug that in, and then character death will fire when our character reaches 0 health. But what happens when we call character death? A few things. First, we want our skeletal mesh to simulate physics. Set all bodies simulate physics. So now that we've set this to true, that means when our character dies, our mesh, our skeletal mesh, is going to have each part of it start to simulate physics. And that's going to look a little weird. See, if we go ahead and, you know what, I'll create a little something just so I can kill myself really quick. Keyboard, key, E, okay. So let's go ahead and change our health every single time I hit the E key, and let's do -1. So I just die instantly when I hit the E key. Let's play, E key, and as soon as I die, my health goes to 0, my character goes through the floor. Why is that? Well, if you watch the other video, then you would know that it's because our skeletal mesh currently has some default collision settings. If we click on our skeletal mesh inherited component here, we can scroll down and select our collision presets. We are going to want to select block overall dynamic. And now when we die, go ahead and hit the E key. We kind of shoot out, but a good thing is that we are not falling through the floor anymore. So what's happening when we die? Well, basically, on our master character, not our master playable character, when our skeletal mesh starts to simulate physics, it collides with our capsule component, and then it shoots off because it's in the middle of the capsule component. So what we need to do is grab our capsule component and change its collision. So we're going to set collision enabled, and instead of it being collision enabled or physics only, we're going to use query only. And that's the perfect preset for having a ragdoll sort of effect when our character dies. Go ahead and close that, kill our character, and that's perfect, but we can still move around. If you start hitting WASD, you can still roam around the level. We just kind of left our mesh behind, and that's because our blueprint is our actual character. The mesh is just a representation, kind of pretending to be our character. It's an illusion that video games often take advantage of. So what we have to do is either disable input, which is what I did in the previous video, or we can do something else. And I think I'm going to try something else. So on this function, character death, we're going to grab our character movement, and we are going to set max walk speed to 0. Perfect, it automatically chose 0 for us. Go ahead and set that. And that is excellent. So now when we die, we can't move anywhere. We just sit there and there's really not much we can do. Oh, we can jump. So quickly setting our jump Z velocity also to 0. Then we can test that out, and now we can't do anything except move our camera around, which is a really nice effect when you're dead, because it really makes it look nice. And that's much better. Now that we have no ability to walk or jump, and we're basically ragdolling on the floor, it really looks like we died. The only thing that doesn't look like we died is our progress bars up on the top left continue to decrease. And that's not a huge deal. If we have a game over screen come up really fast, it's really not a big deal. But me, I would like to change that. And the first thing that we can do is go ahead and grab our stats widget, and we can set visibility to hidden. That would make it pretty apparent that we have died. Now we don't see those timers ticking down, and our character is dead on the screen. Let's make it look a little bit better. We can slow down time with something called a time dilation. Go ahead and right click on the event graph, and we will do time dilation, set global time dilation. And let's just set it to something like 0.2. That'll be 1/5 the speed of real time. And our character goes off and dies in a random direction really slow. So the thing about global time dilation is that it slows down the whole world. Everything slows down, not only our character, which is really nice because if things are falling out of the sky or leaves rustling in the wind, then those will also slow down as well. And one last thing, I noticed that when our character died and we went into slow motion, everything looked great except our character kind of just flew off the screen. One thing that we can do is parent our camera boom to our skeletal mesh. That way it follows specifically the mesh rather than just the capsule. So we'll go ahead and just grab this camera boom and drop it right on the mesh. And after reordering the hierarchy, go ahead and open your master player character. You'll have to compile and save that one as well since that one's in the level. We'll go ahead and run around, and then when you kill yourself, the camera will follow your character as well, instead of just stopping exactly in its tracks. And if the time dilation is a little too strong for you, you can always change the value right there inside of the function. It's really quick. All you have to do is go to character death, and something like maybe 0.5 might be a little bit more reasonable. Alright, so we have a character dying. So let's set up a quick game over as well. A game over will obviously happen when our character dies, and we'll create its own function because game overs can happen not only if you die, if you fail a specific mission, something like that, then it can cause a game over. So let's go ahead and create another function called game over. In our character death function, we are going to bring out does death cause a game over? We're going to branch off of that. If it does not, so if this value is false, we're just going to stop there. But if it's true, we're going to call our game over function that we just made. And we're going to need a widget to go ahead and actually cause a game over to happen. So the first thing that happens when you have a game over in most games is that the game mode, the control mode from your player controller changes slightly. So instead of it only being game, it's going to be changed to UI instead. So we're going to grab our player controller, and this information as far as input modes is set in the player controller, so that's why we have to get it from the player controller. If we drop off that, we can go ahead and change our input mode to UI only. And that's perfect. So when we go ahead and create a widget later on, which is going to be our game over widget, we can go ahead and select here that that will be our widget in focus. But to go ahead and do that, we'll need to create a widget really fast. So let's go to Blueprints, Widgets, User Interface, create a widget, and this is going to be our game over widget. Open that bad boy up. That'll bring us to our friendly game over widget. I'm going to make it real simple. I'm going to go ahead and add a background blur. And I am going to make sure that that takes up the entire area. For the offset, change that to 0 and 0 for the offset on the bottom. Now you can see the green box is the size of the background blur. That takes up the entire screen. Since I selected the anchor to take up the whole screen and there's no offset, it'll automatically default to the screen size no matter what size the screen is. After that, we will need some text. Go ahead and drag that on the canvas panel. We're going to go ahead and anchor that directly to the center and change the positions here back down to 0. That way it is in the middle, except the top left of the text block is in the middle. The way to get it directly in the middle is with the alignment. You want it to be in the middle of the text block, which is 0.5, and in the middle vertically as well, which is 0.5. So if you zoom in, it'll be right in the middle, and if you change the size here on the details panel, it will remain in the middle. What are we going to need this text to say? So this right here is going to be what pops up when we get that game over. We're just going to type in game over. So there's a lot that you can do with widgets. I'm going to take the simple way, and I'm just going to size this to content. That way, no matter what size I change the font to, the green box will change with it. Probably want something like that. I always like to have an outline. So we'll go to outline settings, game over, and that's excellent. Right now, by default, the blur strength was set to 0. Let's just go ahead and change it to something like 2 or 3. And that's going to blur whatever's happening pretty harshly. Now here on our master character, we are going to want to create a widget. What widget are we going to want to create? That's going to be the game over widget. And then we're going to want to set that to variable game over widget. We're going to want to add to the viewport, and we want it to be above any other widgets that may appear on screen. So let's go ahead and set it to something high like 9 in the Z order. So now that we've done that, we want to go ahead and start with creating the widget instead of setting input mode. We'll go ahead and move input mode a little further on, and we can just directly plug our game over widget variable into the in-focus widget. What does that do? That means when the widget appears on screen, we don't have to click on it with the mouse in order to have it come in focus. It'll just automatically be in focus when it comes on screen. Another thing that we need to do from our player controller is show our mouse cursor, and this is something that you can really only do from the player controller. So we're going to type in show mouse cursor, set it to true. So we have a full game over sequence here now. Whenever we call game over, we'll have that game over widget appear on screen really high in the Z order. We're going to set our input mode to UI only, that way we can't move our character, and then we're going to show our mouse cursor. So let's kill ourselves, and we get that game over with our mouse here. There is one other thing that we should do with our game over widget. We should add a button. Add that to the canvas panel, and this can kind of go anywhere. I'm just going to go ahead and anchor it to the bottom middle. Boom, boom. Probably bring it up a little bit, but align it towards the middle. Compile and save. I actually want it to be a little bit bigger than that, so let's change the size and change the size. 800 by 150 looks decent to me. And the cool thing about buttons is that you can add one block of text to them. You can't add any more though, so if you try to drop that directly on the button, it's just going to say can't accept additional children. And this text block is going to stay on the button even if we move the button around. So if we go ahead and move it, the text is going to stay right on it, which is really nice, really handy. And we're just going to want to say restart level on that bad boy. Outline settings, a little bit on there, make it a little bigger. That's perfect. So the thing about text is that if you have it visible on a button, sometimes when the player tries to click on the button but they click on one of the letters or something like that, the button won't register. So what you need to do with the text is change its visibility from visible to not hit testable. And since this one won't have any children or anything, we can just set it to self only. But now we won't have any trouble clicking this button because our text is not hit testable. So any clicks are just going to go right through the text and it's going to hit the button below. But what happens when we hit this button below, we get to set an event for that. On clicked. Like any event, clicking on this button is going to cause this event to fire. What do we want to happen when this button is clicked on? We're going to want to open a level. What level are we going to want to open? Well, we'll go ahead and just open our third-person example map level. I'm just going to copy the name exactly because it does need to be exact whenever you're opening a level. That's perfect. So now we have a button that is going to open our level whenever we click it. And it's going to open a fresh new level like it's loaded for the first time, so all of our variables and everything from our instances that we had before our character died will be refreshed to a brand new version of them. And all of these pickups are going to go ahead and respawn as well whenever we go ahead and restart the level. So let's do that. All of those are gone. Kill ourselves. Oh man, that was sad. Restart the level and they're all back. Oh, one thing that I noticed immediately is that we didn't change our game mode. We didn't change our game mode back to game. So we need to go ahead and do that. So when we click on restart the game, we're going to get our player controller and we are going to set our input mode to game only. Excellent. We're also going to need to set show mouse cursor to false. That's excellent. That means when we restart the game, it's automatically going to change our input mode and change the visibility of our mouse cursor. There we are. And now we're playing again. And you can do this all day. There we go. So we have a character that's dying and causing a game over. We can clean up our game over widget a little bit. I always like to name things. This is going to be a restart button. Text is just going to be game over text. And this is going to be restart text. None of our texts need to be variables because we're not changing the text in any way at this point. Let's go ahead and close our game over widget. That's really all we need from it. And we already have a way for our character to die and game over. That's actually really helpful. That was pretty fast. The next thing we need to do is pretty simple. We're just going to create another function for when our stamina goes equal to or less than 0%. So we are going to change walk speed with this function because we want our walk speed to be lowered whenever our character has low stamina. So with change walk speed, what we're going to do is grab our character's movement and we are going to set max walk speed. And what are we going to set it to? Well, we're going to make this function versatile like our other stats change functions. So we're going to create an input that is a float, and this is going to be new walk speed. Plug that right into max walk speed. Now whenever we call this function, the input will be our new walk speed. Just remember that the default max speed for our character is 600, and we'll use that as a base. So now we have our change walk speed function. We're going to go ahead and call this whenever our stamina drops below or equal to 0. And that's really handy because we already checked to see if our stamina is less than or equal to 0 in both of our change and decrease stamina functions. So at this point, we're going to call change walk speed here if our stamina is set to 0. What's the new walk speed going to be? 200, 1/3 of the normal walk speed, since our default walk speed is 600. And I know I said earlier that timers do have difficulties with functions that have inputs. And that's normally because the input value is set at the point when the function is called, and timers can't really do that. They don't have the ability to set this right here whenever they call a function. So even though this is going to be called from a timer, when the timer calls the decreased stamina function, it's still going to have a specific value set here that the timer can handle. So that's a little bit confusing, but don't worry, timers won't ruin this. And with change stamina, we do need to go ahead and change our walk speed once again to 200. But let's say our stamina is not 0. Well, that happens off of this false branch. So we are going to call change walk speed back to the default 600 if that's the case. And then we're going to check to see if our stamina is greater than or equal to 1. And then we would just change our stamina to 1 if that's the case. So excellent. We just had to reorder a few things. And we'll change our walk speed back to normal at any point if our stamina changes and isn't 0. And that should be all we have to do for that. So if we start running around, can slowly see, okay, that's going to be way too slow. For this, we are going to change stamina instead. So I'm just going to hit E to change our stamina to test it out. And let's go ahead and lower it by, let's say, 10% every single time I hit that. And I'm running pretty normal, bringing it down, bringing it down, bringing it down, until I get to 0. And now I'm walking around. What brings up my stamina? The steak does. So I ate some steak, back up to full stamina, and I'm running around again. So we have a good system. What's important is finding ways on how to break it. Whenever we have systems like this in place in real games, you'll find ways to break it. But in this case, it looks like it's working pretty well. Alright, so we have health and stamina working properly. Now we just want our water to slowly lower our health. So this one we can think about a little bit. Normally when we change our hydration or call change hydration, that is when we're increasing our hydration. But I guess later on if we add items like salt or sodas or something like that, we can lower our hydration with that. And if our hydration reaches 0, then we would want to change our health. So let's go ahead and do that with hydration. And what we would do is just lower it by 10%, so negative 0.1, if our hydration is brought down to 0. What I'm more thinking about is over time, our timer will continue calling decrease hydration. And if we're already at 0 hydration, that's when our health should really go down each time that it's called with 0 hydration. So let's go ahead and change our health if our hydration is less than or equal to 0. And let's bring this down by the same amount, 10%. And change hydration. Let's bring it down by 10% whenever we hit the E key. Alright, so let's test this out. And I have some hydration, and I'll keep hitting E just to bring it down, and now I'm at basically none. Okay, so now every single time the timer begins to call decrease hydration, it'll realize that I don't have any to decrease, and then it'll lower my maximum health by 10%. Okay, so that is pretty easy, and hydration seems to be working pretty well so far. The decrease hydration is really the important one. And lastly, let's go ahead and change our sleep. And for sleep, whenever we're at 0 sleep, I want our character to kind of just take a quick nap, like they're narcoleptic or something like that. So just for maybe 3 seconds, they can go ahead and just take a little nap. And to do that, we'll have to disable movement. But we only want it to last for about 3 seconds. And to do that, we need a delay. Delays are really helpful, but you can't use them inside of functions. So if I click on any function here in my functions graph, I can type in delay, and unfortunately you can't use delays in functions, but you can use them in the event graph. And we can call events like you would call a function. So I'm just going to create a custom event that I can call just like a function. And I'm going to call this fall asleep. So with the fall asleep function, what we're going to do is drag off of our character movement. Go ahead and select disable movement. Because we don't want our character to move when our character supposedly falls asleep. After our character can no longer move, we're going to delay about 3 seconds. So go ahead and type in a delay there, and since we're in the event graph, we should be able to select it and use it. After the delay, we can change our sleep, improve it a little bit. Since they do get a little bit of a nap there, we can increase it by 10%. And after we increase our sleep by a little bit, we can drag off of our character movement and set our movement mode back to walking. That will allow us to walk again. When we decrease sleep, if our sleep is at 0, we are going to call the event fall asleep, call function. And we can do the same for change sleep. That way we can test it out pretty well too. Fall asleep. And that'll happen when we reach 0. Let's go ahead and check this out. Change sleep, change it by 10%. Now if we go in here, we go ahead and hit E. We are moving normally, bring it all the way down to 0, and I can't move around at all. Luckily my camera still works. And we gain a little bit of sleep. And over time it will decrease as well. So eventually, if you don't get any sleep, you'll just have to take a little nap. Alright, we are no longer going to need this right here. This was just for debugging. Whenever we hit the E key, we call that function. We do not need that anymore. But it does look like everything is working pretty well. Nice. Alright, well I think that is going to bring the video to a close. We now have some detrimental effects happening to our character whenever we reach 0 in specific stats. Don't forget to like the video, comment down below on what you want to see later in this series. And of course my goal is to have a solid survival project at the end of the series, something that you would be proud of, but most of all, I do want you to learn a whole bunch of ways to make a game during this series, and I hope I'm doing a good job of that. So I really appreciate your feedback, really appreciate you watching the video, especially if you got up to this point. Not many people could say that. Hopefully you are learning to think like a game developer, and hopefully you will stick around for more videos like this.